Have you ever noticed how when you're scrolling through modern internet conspiracy theories, you get this overwhelming sense of déjà vu? Like you look past the flashy thumbnails and the algorithm-driven outrage, the capitalized buzzwords,
Yeah, the clickbait.
right, all of that, and suddenly you realize you're basically just watching recycled scripts from, like, centuries ago.
Yeah, totally. Stripping away the Wi-Fi and the ring lights reveals a completely theatrical performance. I mean, the moment you look closely at the underlying structure of these digital arguments, you're staring at the exact same power dynamics and, well, secret society tactics used back in the 1700s.
Exactly. And that brings us to our mission for you today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are unpacking a really fascinating social media clash detailed in our sources today. It's this exchange between a very prominent internet conspiracy influencer named Leo Leon Zagami and a mysterious, highly articulate commentator who goes by the handle at the song remains the same.
Quite the handle.
Right. And we are treating this single digital spat as a window into something much larger. By analyzing the really dense, frankly terrifying occult history weaponized in this one YouTube comment section, we're going to uncover how hidden power structures operate, how they survive, and, how they constantly rebrand themselves throughout history.
Yeah, approaching a YouTube comment section as a masterclass in esoteric history requires a highly analytical, somewhat skeptical eye. And, just a quick note for you as we get into this, because the sources do touch on some politically charged historical texts and figures, we are strictly unpacking the arguments in the source material. We're not endorsing any of these geopolitical or occult views. We're just reporting on what's there.
Right, absolutely. You're just looking at the mechanics of it.
Exactly. And the sources give us the surgical strike of a comment that manages to dismantle an entire influencer's grift by exposing the actual mechanics of occult power.
So, to understand the absolute takedown this commenter delivered, we first need to look at the historical boogeyman Zagami was trying to summon, like to build his own credibility.
Right.
In his video, Zagami claims that Alexander Dugin, who is this highly influential Russian philosopher and geopolitical strategist, is joining him in condemning the Sabbatean Frankists.
Which is quite the mouthful.
It is. And if you're listening to this and thinking, that sounds like an occult word salad designed just to scare people, you aren't entirely wrong. But let's dig into the actual history Zagami is trying to leverage here, because the Sabbatean movement is just this masterclass in mass psychological manipulation.
It really is. The history there is intense and completely central to understanding modern infiltration tactics. We have to go back to the Ottoman Empire, specifically the year 1666.
Okay, 1666.
Right. So a mystic named Sabbatai Zevi proclaimed himself to be the long-awaited Messiah. And the response was unprecedented. I mean, he amassed a massive, fervent following across the Jewish diaspora. But the movement hit a brick wall when Zevi was captured by the Ottoman Sultan.
Right, because you can't just have an unauthorized Messiah running around your empire.
Exactly. So the Sultan gave him a stark choice: face execution or convert to Islam.
Wow. I mean, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a follower back then. You've, sold your belongings, you believe the world is fundamentally changing, and then the promised Messiah simply capitulates and puts on a turban.
Yeah, the cognitive dissonance must have been absolutely off the charts.
Right. Logically, the movement should have just evaporated overnight.
It should have, but the psychological fallout of that moment is what birthed the dynamic we're analyzing today. Rather than admit they were wrong, which is, a nearly impossible psychological hurdle for a fanatic, a core group of his followers engaged in a massive rationalization, they created a crypto faith.
A crypto faith. So they practiced it in secret.
Yes. They reasoned that if the Messiah converted to a different religion and committed this ultimate betrayal, well, then the path to salvation couldn't possibly be through traditional righteousness. The new theology became redemption through sin.
That is, wow. So the logic flips entirely.
Completely flips.
Instead of striving for purity, the belief becomes that you have to descend into the darkest, most transgressive acts to liberate the divine sparks trapped in the darkness.
That's the exact theological justification, yeah.
You essentially have to break the universe's rules to transcend them.
And that theology took an even darker turn a century later with Jacob Frank. So in the 18th century, Frank claimed to be the reincarnation of Zevi and pushed this concept of redemption through sin to its absolute horrifying extreme.
Okay, so he took a bad idea and made it worse.
Much worse. The sources refer to this as antinomianism, which is the complete and deliberate rejection of all moral law.
Antinomianism.
Right. Frank advocated for the systemic reversal of all societal taboos. He actually led his followers to mass convert to Catholicism in Poland.
Wait, Catholicism, why?
Because outwardly, they played the part of devout Catholics, but internally, they maintained a secretive network bound together by performing rituals that deliberately violated every religious and moral law they could.
Okay, imagine you're trying to subvert a culture. Weaponizing transgression is an incredibly effective tool.
Oh, absolutely.
You infiltrate a mainstream structure like the Catholic Church, but internally, the core bond of your group is this shared extreme taboo breaking. It subverts the moral order from within while presenting a perfectly compliant face to the outside world.
Exactly. And Zagami is using this 18th century highly charged history to sound authoritative. He's tossing around Sabbatean Frankist as a catch-all term for a transnational occult elite that still secretly runs global politics.
Right, he's using it to validate his own channel by associating himself with major geopolitical figures like Dugin.
But that reliance on ancient paranoia is exactly what opens Zagami up to the surgical strike from the commentator. The influencer attempts to legitimize his brand by pointing at the shadows. But this mysterious commentator, at The Song Remains the Same, steps in and completely unmasks him using the exact same esoteric code.
The precision of this comment is lethal. Let's look at the exact quote from the sources. The commentator writes, quote, "Your virtual egregore is exposed as such. You are like Weishaupt calling Loyola a cuckold. Clown of a high degree," end quote.
It's so densely packed.
Right. I was looking at this term egregore in our research. Usually I hear it used in esoteric deep dives to mean a sort of psychic avatar, like a collective energy fed by the beliefs of a group.
Yeah, like a thought form.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But applying it to a YouTube comment section completely shifts the context. It reads to me like the commenter is telling Zagami his entire subscriber base, his digital cloud, his whole internet persona is just a manufactured hallucination, like he's farming engagement, not leading a movement.
That framing brilliantly strips the influencer of his perceived authority. The commenter points out the artificiality of the digital echo chamber, but, the intellectual fatal blow is the historical comparison that follows it. You are like Weishaupt calling Loyola a cuckold.
Okay, assuming you're familiar with standard conspiracy lore. Adam Weishaupt founded the Bavarian Illuminati in 1776, and Ignatius of Loyola founded the Jesuits in 1540.
The two heavyweights of conspiracy theories.
Right. In almost every late-night rabbit hole, these two groups are portrayed as the ultimate puppet masters, locked in this bitter mortal war for global control. But the commenter isn't validating that war at all. The phrasing Weishaupt calling Loyola a cuckold implies something entirely different about their relationship.
It implies they are intimately connected. The phrasing exposes the rivalry between the Illuminati and the Jesuits as a manufactured diatribe. It's a false dichotomy.
A fake war.
Right. The commenter is pointing out that Weishaupt and Loyola are essentially two initiates operating on the exact same side. By staging a theatrical, high-stakes war between two supposed extremes, they manage the public's attention.
Oh, so the masses pick a side, completely unaware that both sides funnel back into the same hidden power structure.
Exactly. It's brilliant crowd control.
It's the professional wrestling model of social control. You have two guys beating each other up in the ring, screaming at each other on the microphones, but they ride to the arena in the same car and share the ticket revenue.
That is the perfect analogy. And the commenter is accusing Zagami of running this exact same playbook. Zagami pretends to be the lone truth teller fighting the system, but he is using the system's exact tactics. Fear-mongering, false binaries, algorithm manipulation, just to farm engagement.
Wow. The critique cuts so deep because it reveals the influencer isn't a rebel at all. He's just another middle manager in the attention economy, using occult history as a cheap prop. And the context of who delivered this critique elevates the entire exchange.
It really does, because our sources reveal a massive plot twist here.
Yeah, the commentator behind the Zeppelin-inspired handle, "At the Song Remains the Same," is actually an artist. They end their comment with a sign-off. "You are born among us, we are among you. Frank lives."
Frank lives, referring back to Jacob Frank.
Right. And that line happens to be a lyric from their own music, specifically a track called Cristela Vivente.
Using a song lyric as a closing argument transforms the interaction into a piece of situationist art. The artist blurs the boundary between reality and digital conspiracy. On one level, the lyric functions as a hypnotic, psychedelic mantra.
Yeah.
On another, within the context of the debate, it reads like a terrifying, genuine warning from the very secret societies Zagami claims to be fighting.
The artist completely destabilizes the influencer by bringing true artistic fluidity into a space dominated by rigid, fake internet outrage. It exposes the gross hypocrisy of Zagami's current grift.
And we should talk about that hypocrisy because it's pretty glaring.
Yeah, the sources point out that Zagami actually used to do legitimate esoteric analysis. Years ago, he mapped out Alexander Dugin's historical connections to Aleister Crowley and the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis.
Right, which is significant for anyone unfamiliar. Crowley was an infamous early 20th century British occultist whose philosophy centered around do what thou wilt.
Which is essentially a modern echo of the antinomianism we discussed earlier, the redemption through sin stuff.
Exactly, and the OTO was the secret society he popularized, heavily focused on ritual sex magic. Zagami used to trace those actual, verifiable lineages.
But now, he conveniently ignores the Crowley connection just to praise Dugin and feed the algorithm. It's like he abandoned investigative work to toss a few coins into his own guitar case, begging for views on the digital sidewalk.
The contrast is stark. The influencer sells tickets to a constantly shifting ghost story, just changing the villains whenever it suits the current geopolitical news cycle. The artist, conversely, uses history not to sell fear, but to expose the mechanics of the illusion itself.
So when an influencer faces that kind of exposure, when someone dismantles their grift in their own comment section using their own lore, their options are incredibly limited.
Very limited. I would imagine engaging with the comment at all is a trap for Zagami.
Right, because if he argues back, he has to address his own hypocrisy regarding Dugin and Crowley. He has to admit the historical contradictions in his own narrative. So the only defense mechanism left for the clickbait conspiracy influencer is silent censorship. You just quietly delete the comment.
Because the grifter's stage requires absolute, unquestioned control over the script. The moment an artist steps onto the stage and reveals the wires holding up the scenery, dropping the curtain is the only way to protect the business model.
It's fascinating. And if Zagami represents the cheap, manufactured digital outrage version of esoteric lore, the sources point us toward a much deeper, radical theory about how actual power structures manage the public.
Yeah, moving from fake digital outrage to the concept of fake historical document.
Exactly. Specifically, the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now, the standard, universally accepted historical consensus is that the protocols are a literary forgery, a fabricated text created by the Okhrana, the Tsarist secret police, to drum up anti-Semitism and political paranoia.
Right. The historical consensus treats it as a fabrication spun out of thin air. But the sources present a far more radical thesis here, the concept of controlled disclosure.
Controlled disclosure. Okay, walk me through that.
The theory suggests that the document wasn't entirely fictional, but rather reflected real, underlying dynamics of power and plans for infiltration. The twist is that it was deliberately released or leaked by the elites themselves, but packaged in a way that guaranteed it would be discredited.
It's an incredible psychological trap. Think about how a corporation might deliberately leak a flawed prototype design to test the market, or how a magician shows you his empty left hand with a dramatic flourish while palming the coin in his right.
That's a great way to look at it.
You dismiss the real threat because the presentation feels staged. The elite put their playbook out in the open, literally hidden in plain sight, knowing full well that the educated classes will dismiss it as a crude forgery. If you're an intellectual, you refuse to believe the document just to distance yourself from the gullible masses who fall for it.
And that psychology of disbelief serves as a protective shield for the power structure. It neutralizes the threat of discovery. The sources argue this represents the difference between blindly consuming a narrative, which is what conspiracy influencers rely on, and actually reading the underlying sheet music of power.
Because the architects of these systems are perfectly fine with the public seeing the notes on the page, as long as they're confident the public has no idea how to read the music.
Precisely.
Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, sure, this idea of controlled disclosure and reverse psychology is fascinating, but it's just high-level political theory, wait until you see how these exact mechanics were weaponized in the physical world. This brings us right back to the Russian court, and it perfectly connects that dark theology of redemption through sin to active historical political infiltration.
Yes. The theory transitions seamlessly from abstract theology to a tactical weapon here, perfectly embodied by Grigory Rasputin.
The Mad Monk himself.
The very same. Historically, Rasputin is tied to a Siberian flagellant sect called the Khlysti. The Khlysti, much like the Frankists we discussed earlier, believed the flesh was inherently corrupt.
Right.
Their theology dictated that the only path to spiritual elevation was to exhaust sin by fully indulging in it.
To exhaust sin. So, on the surface, if you read a basic biography of Rasputin, it just looks like a charlatan abusing his spiritual authority to host massive orgies with the St. Petersburg aristocracy.
Just looks like pure hedonism.
Right, pure hedonism.
Yeah.
But looking at the actual mechanics of what he was doing with the highest levels of the Romanov court, including his influence over the Tsarina, it wasn't just a party. It was mutually assured destruction.
The hedonism was the bait. The objective was psychological submission. When you convince the most powerful aristocrats in an empire to commit the most forbidden, transgressive acts with you in a secret ritual, you aren't just sharing an experience, you are binding them to you.
The leverage.
Exactly. The breaking of intense moral and sexual taboos serves as the ultimate blackmail, disguised as spiritual enlightenment.
You get a duke or a duchess to commit a massive sin in a Khlysti ritual, and they can never speak out against you. They are completely complicit.
It is an active weapon of destabilization operating at the very heart of the empire. Blackmail becomes the spiritual glue holding the network together.
That is so dark, but so effective. And I want to introduce an analogy here to synthesize everything the sources are arguing, because the mechanics of these groups are strikingly consistent across the board. Based on this deep dive, historical secret societies operate almost exactly like a modern corporate franchise model.
Yeah, applying a corporate franchise framework to secret societies clarifies their survival strategy immensely.
Think about a massive fast food chain, right? The corporate headquarters owns the core product, the secretive business model, the supply chain logistics. But they open up different regional locations with localized branding and slightly different menus to appeal to whatever the local market demands.
And the sources point to the Carbonari in 19th century Italy as a perfect example of this local branding.
Right, the Carbonari use this incredibly elaborate symbolism based around lumberjacks and charcoal burners. Their induction rituals talked about clearing the forest of wolves, which was a metaphor for ridding Italy of tyrants.
They disguised their clandestine meetings as selling charcoal.
But if you strip away the lumberjack outfits, the inner circle was just operating a branch of the Grand Orient Masonic Lodge.
The Carbonari symbolism was merely localized branding necessary to operate clandestinely in the specific political environment of 19th century Italy. The underlying architecture of the organization, the hierarchical degrees, the oath of absolute secrecy, the compartmentalization of information was entirely Masonic.
They just slapped a localized lumberjack logo on the storefront, but the underlying corporate structure, the franchise manual, was identical to what was being used in France or Germany.
The franchise analogy validates the broader point the sources present regarding the continuity of hidden power. I mean, a group might call themselves the Khlysti in Siberia, the Illuminati in Bavaria, the Carbonari in Italy, or the Frankists in Eastern Europe. The theatrical costumes change. The regional metaphors adapt to the century.
But the underlying mechanics, the use of absolute secrecy, the method of binding members through shared transgression, the false dichotomies, and the ultimate goal of subverting established power structures from within remain rigidly identical.
Exactly. The directors behind the scenes are running the exact same script.
It demands that you look past the flashy labels and focus entirely on the mechanics, which is exactly why the artist's critique of the influencer in that YouTube comment section was so devastating. Zagami was obsessing over the labels, screaming about Sabbatean Frankists to farm views, while the commentator exposed the actual machinery of the grift, proving Zagami was just playing a role in a very old play.
The exchange reveals a continuity of power dynamics that is almost always obscured by the chaotic noise of the present moment. By focusing on the structural behavior rather than the specific conspiracy theories being peddled, the architecture of control becomes visible.
We have covered incredible ground today. We started with what appeared to be a trivial digital spat, a YouTube comment exposing an influencer mining esoteric history for algorithm engagement.
We unpacked the paradoxical dark theology of the Sabbatians and Frankists, exploring how redemption through sin evolved from mass cognitive dissonance into a tactical tool for institutional infiltration.
We analyzed the radical concept of controlled disclosure, the idea that elites might hide their playbook in plain sight through discredited documents. And we explored how hidden power structures utilize a franchise model changing their branding from the Romanov court to 19th century Italy, while maintaining the exact same methods of psychological submission and control.
It's a lot to take in, but it really changes how you look at history.
It really does. So we began by noting how modern internet conspiracy theories feel like recycled scripts from centuries ago. That leaves you with a final, somewhat provocative thought to ponder. If historical secret societies successfully operated like corporate franchises for hundreds of years, seamlessly changing their logos, their costumes, and their initiation rituals to fit the political and cultural markets of different eras, what does the current localized branding of hidden power look like today?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right now, in our hyper-connected, algorithmically driven digital landscape, what is the new franchise logo? Because if the song really does remain the same, the music is definitely still playing. You just have to figure out who is currently writing the sheet music.